Wake up, Hotshot.
What's up, y'all? Nigeria Chambers here from Big Gold Belt Media here today to talk about a new documentary that I checked out a few months ago. So it's a long time coming, but the documentary Hotshot is available right now on demand and digital. I'm here with the men that made this happen at this rate, because we have the director, writer, producer, and just all things that made this a passion project for them to get this done. Gabe Mann and Phil Donlon. Folks know Phil, that's my guy, but he does still deserve a proper introduction. But nonetheless, Gabe and Phil, welcome. How you doing today?
Thanks for having us.
Hey,
Doing great.
doing great, man. Thanks for having us back on. I'm really hyped. And the other thing is I've been watching you guys since obviously we did the power stuff.
Yeah.
And man, just doing great work, blowing up. I'm just so happy for you, and it's so I'm happy to be back on again. I'm honored. I'm not famous enough now.
Not at all. You're fam. That's what it is. You're
Yeah.
fam, and you're always going to have a seat. And it's interesting because we built our friendship over the time, and Phil called me, and there's so much I know he's working on, but he was like, I really, really, really need you to check this out. And I was in the midst of so many other things, and Phil's always been somebody very respectful to me in my time and everything, but he's like, nah, you really need to check this one out. So I was like, all right, you know what? Let's do it. And without a doubt, I gotta tell you, as a sucker for documentaries, I've really have never seen anything like this. And it's not just the subject matter from somebody being from the East Coast who's just completely ignorant to what we think a wildfire is in the West Coast, but just the goddamn production. Holy hell. I told Phil, because I gave him a little bit of nuggets of how I was feeling. I said, first off, I said, I love the narration, because most times when you have documentaries, this is very monotone, felt very scripted. Read all these lines, you're just like, all right, knowledge on knowledge on knowledge. But this one felt more like a conversation. They felt like it was just beating you over the head with things that felt very personal. And then if you don't even take that, just watching it, it's like, oh my God, this is fascinating to a point of really immersing the viewers into something that, as I said, is extremely something you two are both passionate about, but something that the world should have more awareness to. Because, as I said, being from the West Coast, from the East Coast, we have this perception of like wildfires. Oh, wow, houses are burning. They'll get it. They'll figure it out, on to the next. But like being in the trenches here is like, this is really a problem that deserves a much global attention. And then for the folks that's out there each and every day, that's fighting this monster of a beast, that is there even truly a solution for it? And really getting to know them, I thought it was just completely beautiful. So I just want to make sure before we get started today, I gave flowers to you both for doing this fantastic job. This is why all of you all can check out the reviews online, because there's nothing but positive love for this. This was definitely a banger. And thank you so much for sharing this with me.
Thank you.
got it.
God, that
You got
was
it,
a
brother.
lot. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'll correct you, man. There was a brush fire in Brooklyn last week, so you guys
Really?
are vulnerable to it. It's like
See?
50 acres. Like, it can happen, but obviously this is a problem out west. And
Yeah.
you touched on the voiceover for this documentary. This was an interesting decision to come to have me narrate it, because ultimately, I wanted to try to find some celebrity to voice this. And the more that Phil and I were sitting in the editing room and trying to figure out what this story should be, the reality is Phil pointed out something very wise. The way that I learned about fire was I had this transformation of being exposed to it. And when you witness wildfire in person, it really does something to you. And I think Phil, having gone on a bunch of fires with me, that clicked for him. It is one thing to watch it on the news. It's another thing to see it in person. It taps into something primal inside of you. And I don't think that you can convey that if you're Willem Dafoe just reading a script. Yeah. And ultimately, the film sort of mirrors my transformation, understanding what wildfire is, the good and the bad, because it's yeah, it's destructive, but it's also transformative. It creates new regrowth. So you have this duality in there. And so Phil had a really good idea of like, man, I think you just need to tell this story from your perspective, which I didn't want to do.
Yeah. Phil, to talk to me a little bit about why the time was now, and considering all of the different projects you've been involved with, the opportunities knocking at your door. Why was it the time right now to empty out the bank account, and ensure that this was brought to the world?
Well, simply because Gabe asked me to. I mean, I have very few people in my life where if they ask me to do something, I go, just tell me when and where, and I'm there. And Gabe is, one of my best creative partners that I have, and I don't have many. I can count them on one hand in this business, maybe just 10 fingers. So he asked, he just said, I need help. He was already filming this. He was already filming the doc, and he had a lot of knowledge, and he needed some help trying to storytell this thing and figure it out. So I hopped on board about halfway, and I think much like anything else, you're asking, okay, what's the time? What makes it now? The time's now. I think we were pregnant with this for so long. We eventually just had to push it out. In fact, there were many times where, much like Coppola's Apocalypse Now, Gabe started kind of going a little nuts with this thing, and I started saying, Gabe, you got to finish it, man. We can't, he's like, well, but if I shoot this one more fire, and I'm going, no, man, you're going to be in a rubber room soon. And so I think, ultimately we could have continued to make this, and who knows, maybe there's another version of this down the road. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, this is something that is always going to be around, fire and destruction. So I think we just decided, here, this is it. This is the time. Let's punch it out. And then the second part to that would be, as we were completing it, Gabe mentioned trying to get a celebrity voiceover. We thought, let's go the traditional Hollywood route with it. And we took it to a lot of producers. Some agents were looking at it. Everyone had an opinion about how this should be done. But it didn't match up with our opinion of how it should be done. And everyone told us we were wrong, and different ways to cut it, and Gabe shouldn't voice over it. Yes, you should get a celebrity and all this. And finally, we were just like, no, let's just do it ourselves. So one of the things that sort of makes this interesting, it is 100% independently produced. We had no Hollywood help, none whatsoever. No Hollywood money. We had no sales agent. We put it out on these streaming platforms, which, by the way, is not easy to do.
Yeah.
They make it really hard. Gabe can talk more about that. But yeah, so that was kind of it. We just, I don't know. It's just like we birthed it, and we were just like, here it is, world. And we kind of put it out. And this is the most important piece of work I've ever done as an artist. And I don't like to call myself that, but this project, and when I was telling you, you have to really watch this, it's the one thing that I'm willing to stick my neck out for.
Yeah. Just for the sake of awareness for some of the statistics here, can we talk about some quick facts that people should know about wildfires, including seasons, even documenting that we've just experienced one of our hottest years ever? Is there any other important information that you think really pertains to understanding what are we walking into in terms of watching this documentary?
I think maybe the most important thing, and it's a motif in the film where I say it repeatedly, everything that can burn will burn. The most important thing to know about wildfires is it is a permanent part of our ecosystem. It's not going anywhere. It's always been here. We've always had terrible fires. And in fact, the worst fires in history were long ago. And so a lot of people want to assign a certain narrative pertaining to carbon emissions, and that's the control knob for wildfire, and that's not the case. In fact, fighting fires is actually the primary reason why the fires are getting progressively worse. Because the more we try to suppress something that's inevitable, it's like holding a beach ball underwater, right? You can do it for a little while, but the more you try to push it down, the harder it is to hold it up. And eventually it's just going to burst out. And the more you push it down, the more force it pops back out with. And it's the same with wildfires. So you have carbon growing out of the ground every single year. So there's more and more fuel coming out. You have to think of the plants as fuel, not just plants. So if you have more fuel coming out of the ground every year and you're not getting rid of it, you're just filling up that powder keg more and more and more. And the reality is that you can't stop the ignitions. Sometimes it's a vehicle catching fire on the side of the road, it's power lines coming down. And in California this year, there's a ton of arson. So that's a growing problem too. And more than half of the acres for the entire fire season in California this year was deliberate arson. So if you don't have that, you have lightning. And the worst year in California's history was 2020, and that was all lightning. And that's something that obviously we're never going to stop or control. And so the one thing that we can control is the fuels on the ground. And so the remedy for this is the ancient remedy that's worked for 10,000 years, which is prescribed fire. And that's what the indigenous people did all throughout the West. They set fire to the ground. In the Yosemite Valley, they burned it off every single year. Now, we don't do that because we have tourism in the Yosemite Valley. And we worry about, the smoke, driving away tourists, driving away the economy. But ultimately, every single forester, every fire official will tell you the same thing, that fire is healthy. You need to have it. And the more you suppress it, the more you're going to get these big destructive fires that you can't stop. And so it's just like mowing your lawn. If you do it every single week, it's just a quick, easy little thing. If you let it go for several months or years, dude, that's trees growing out. And it's so much harder to get yourself out of it. So I find that the most consistent narrative in the mainstream that most people consume who don't really understand wildfire, they just see it in the headlines. The main narrative is that it's climate change. The problem with that is it's a very disempowering narrative. Because then we're telling ourselves we can correct the wildfire problem by just buying more Teslas or installing windmills and all those things that we find as solutions for, what we view to be the climate change issue. None of those are going to do anything for wildfire. And in the meantime, we're not acting on the things that we know could fix it. And so I find that to be a very disempowering narrative. Here's the problem, though. Phil had mentioned reasons why you can't get published in Hollywood. One of those reasons is if you make a wildfire film and it's not about climate change, you will not get published. Period. It's antithetical to what the culture wants to hear, and whatever political motivations may be, happening at a studio at any given time. We had a lot of pushback from people saying that they didn't like the fact that we don't address climate change in the film. I mean, we just take 2 seconds to talk about it. And really, it's just to say, look, man, whether the climate gets worse or better, we're still going to have this problem. So we need to act on the problem specifically. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to hear that. They sort of want to be told that we need more solar panels, we need more Teslas, we need all this stuff. And dude, I can't lie. Like, that's not going to do anything. Do it if you want. It's great. It's awesome. But it's just not going to affect wildfire. No, that became a problem.
Exactly, Dave. That was one of the things we wanted to do was we wanted to give proper information. We just didn't want to make shit up.
Yeah.
So and the other thing, it is talking about the East Coast, though, Dave. Florida does great fire, and that was something I didn't know until we started working on this dot. You could talk way better about it. Surprisingly, Florida, you don't think about it, but all those hurricanes and all. Well, what does that do? It freezes. And what does that become? It's like it's like matchsticks for fire.
Yep.
There's not a lot of wildfires happening in Florida, but that's because they do good fire protection, unlike California. But it's surprising.
Yeah, and then the numbers are staggering. So Florida, back in the 90s, they had a really bad fire year. Knocked out a bunch of homes, destroyed a bunch of their timber industry. It cost them billions of dollars, and not to mention the human cost. They made a very rational decision following that. They're like, let's look at how much this costs. Okay, it cost us $10 billion to have a destructive fire season where they had 500,000 acres burned. Yeah. How much would it cost us to proactively burn those 500,000 acres? And what they discovered is the cost of burning 500,000 acres through prescribed fire, they could get 60 years worth of prescribed fire for the same cost of one bad fire season. So they made the very rational decision. All right, we're just going to burn it proactively. And it takes some measure of community discipline to understand, like, we are going to spend this money now. You're never going to see the results because it's a counterfactual. You're trying to compare it with something that didn't happen. And that's that destructive wildfire, which they have not had ever since the 90s. They burn 2 million acres per year. That would be considered a devastating fire season in California. And yet they do that proactively every year. And when you hear their foresters talk about this, they say every day in Florida is a good day to put fire on the ground. So they have a very, very strong and committed fire culture. And it's interesting to see this dichotomy. And it feels right. People don't think of Florida as fire country because, oh, they get so much water, it's always raining, they get hurricanes. But those things that we think would make it a deterrent to fire and make it less flammable, actually makes it more flammable. The hurricanes knock down the trees, and so now they're disconnected from their water supply, so they're just dead and dry. So they're like ready to go. That's worse than the trees in California that at least still have a little water. In addition, all that rain creates more growth, and as we know, more fuel, bigger bomb. And then beyond that, it's just always hot. It's never cold. So it's like always in the 80s. So frankly, if you just have a few days of no rain, that's like the equivalent of California having a few months without rain. And so it's a very volatile landscape, but they've managed to tame it by being disciplined. California is not disciplined. Florida does more in 1 year than California does in 50 years. That's how far behind California is. And frankly, I don't see how they're going to change. I don't see how they're going to actually do it. That's why it feels right when he says this is going to be an ongoing problem. Like, we could make this documentary again next year and it'd be just as relevant.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the production here. Obviously, folks know Phil's an actor, and you, Gabe, having a background cinematographer here. Now, one may say, as a cinematographer, are you going to take your equipment and immerse yourself in a very dangerous situation for the sake of filmmaking? And as an actor, are you going to go out there with a pretty face, bomb mustache to tell the story, So again, as I mentioned, how important this is to you in terms of the awareness, but you still went out there. It's very easy to say, yeah, we got some folks to do it, or we GoPro somebody up and they went and did it, or we met these awesome group of hotshots and they told their stories and we watched from afar. But y'all went in there and you even talked about like equipment damages and how this is normal commutes for you and whatnot, which easily is enough to say, like, yeah, I don't want any parts of that, and understanding the risk and the dangers, but you did it. What was ultimately what clicked to say, like, we have to be boots on ground in order to get the story done?
Well, I gotta say, now that you put it this way, we're not very smart. We sound like knuckleheads. Like, yeah, you have a camera, I'm an actor, let's go try this. It doesn't make a lot of sense when you put it that way. And it's true, it actually didn't. There were a couple of rushes. There was one time I actually thought Dave and I, we were dead. We got caught in a situation. I'm like, this is how I'm going out. Hopefully someone finds this footage. And Gabe had many more rushes than I, but it was frightening. Okay, go ahead. I'll let you.
Yeah, Phil and I got caught in a couple scenarios that weren't great. But the thing is, like, I'd had so many years under my belt at that point that I've seen it. And the thing is, look, I don't want to make it sound like I was so cavalier. The reality is, I trained up the same way that the firefighters did. I take all the same safety courses, and the thing is like, my adventuring was predicated on an understanding of fire behavior. I had all the right, PPE and all the protective equipment, and I had a general understanding of what I was doing. And we always had radios where we're listening into the crew channels. And because we had inside connects with the crews, they would give us their frequencies that are normally not public. And so we're getting intel from all the crews around us. When they see something, we're hearing it. And so we were able to navigate these things pretty safely. Like, there were a few times we were on the Bobcat fire in California with Phil, where we could hear some chatter about what was happening, and we bolted and we got out of there immediately. So it was, on one hand, yeah, it's very risky. It's very dangerous, and things do go sideways. No matter how safe you are, firefighters get caught in situations all the time because it can be very explosive. It's not necessarily unpredictable. It can just have a temper and do things that are sort of beyond what you'd expect. This was part of the reason why we felt we had to do this in person, because extreme fire behavior is so powerful. I'm telling you, when you see it in person, it changes you. It really does. And it's hard to think of how you can make a documentary that suitably describes that by just having talking heads. It's one thing to just have people talking on camera about a 1,000-foot fire tornado. It's another thing to actually see it. And so Phil and I, our dogma throughout the production was show, don't tell. So we were always trying to find a way to show the thing instead of describing it, because we felt like that's the only thing that does this powerful force of nature justice, is if you actually see it and get this sense of what it feels like, what it sounds like. And Phil can talk about this. The sounds that you get are unreal. And it's not what, and this is,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, this is why Hollywood can't make this movie, because no matter how good a sound designer is, unless you've heard it in person, you don't know what it actually sounds like. It doesn't really sound like fire. It sounds like an ocean or a freight train, depending on the kind of fire activity.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, people who see this, they sort of afterwards go, man, I felt like I was there. I mean, the film is palpable. And I'm really excited to actually talk about this, because most of the interviews we do are like these short little segments on news, like I'm usually on on the news and stuff, and it's all statistics. And we don't get a chance to talk about, the film. I mean, that's really the way I look at it. When we were putting it together and we did make this decision not to do talking head, I wanted it to play like, one of Gabe's huge inspirations is Terrence Malick. You can just look at the picture. You can see Badlands, you can see Thin Red Line through it. His voiceover has a lot of, it's, for me anyway, like a very Badlands sort of VO to it, which I really love a lot. And we wanted it to be like a love story. At least I did. It's me. It's fires the backdrop to this love story. So I don't want people who are watching this to just think like, I'm going to sit down to watch a fire documentary and I'm going to be in class for 2 hours and learn all these things. And you'll learn a lot, but it doesn't play like you're sitting in a college classroom. This plays like a film, it has 3 acts and it's about 2 people. And, there's a lot of, fire sort of becomes almost a metaphor for relationships, and that's important to talk about, because this is a movie. Yes, it's a doc, but we didn't want it to play traditionally like a doc. And a lot of the footage, you just let it play. Because you film something like that, there's no reason to put a cut in. There's no reason to just let it, so there's a lot of imagery on the screen that just sits. And we just sort of let it play and be what it is. That's what it was like. I remember the first time we were walking up to a wall of fire, a wall, like a tidal wave wall of fire. It was like, Gabe, you can't get any closer. And he goes, no, look down. And everything was black. Underneath me, goes, this has already been burned. So we got very close to it. I'm like standing there, and I feel the heat, and I'm looking at this thing, and I'm hearing the freight train, and I'm going, wow. So I think we did a pretty damn good job conveying that through the script.
I think the first thing that just jumped out to me in terms of your comments about like show it, don't tell it, is like little things we take for granted. Like I see it all the time with 18-wheelers and their chains and it's bouncing on the ground. You see those sparks and the way you're like, oh, that's cool. Not realizing like the damages that could come and how catastrophic something I deemed as cool is dangerous to everything around it. And like that shot alone, I think I watched like 3 or 4 times because it looks so cool seeing it in film, and like and being able to tell the story around it is like it quickly had me to reprogram my thoughts and like perspective about it. So like, you know, obviously we always think about cigarettes being thrown on the ground, like boom, a fire, but like being able to talk about the other little things in terms of how, you know, normal day-to-days, how they contribute to this. And then the other thing I really want to say is too, is that like the Hotshots themselves, I mean, these are fearless folks that are selfless. I mean, they're heroes day in and day out. And you're providing a spotlight on them. And for that, as the viewers, obviously we're grateful for their work, but I feel like in a way, I feel like maybe they don't care about the celebrity. They just do the work because they know they're the only people that can do this work. So I'm wondering for you two, what has been their reaction now that there's a little bit of a perspective about their day-to-days, and obviously now a celebrity to it, because now the word hotshot ain't just a comedy movie from back in the day, but it's like, no, this is a legitimate like role out here. People are doing this, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Well, Charlie Sheen, gotta love.
Yeah, exactly. I know. Like, it's an honor to be confused with great native film lore. Hotshots, not only do they not want the spotlight, they're allergic to it. They hate it. They actively, like, will literally run away from media people. They hate the media. And for good reason, because the media who may be drawn to their compelling job don't do a good job of telling the story. And there is also that culture of, it's a lot like Fight Club. It's like, we don't talk about it. And this was a challenge early on in trying to get access to this community. But I had the inside track. And so this is another reason why we didn't have talking heads, because they're a community that's known for not talking to the cameras about what they do. And it felt weird. We shot some interviews. It just didn't work. It felt weird to have them talking about themselves when that's antithetical to hotshot culture. And so in a way, I had to sort of take the bullet and be the dork who says things like, oh, they're like the Navy SEALs of wildland fire. They hate to hear that. They hate it, right? It makes their stomachs churn. But the reality is, if you're speaking to the public and trying to convey just how crazy their job is, there's no more efficient way of doing it than using that cultural trope. And so insofar as their reaction, it has been uniformly positive, to the point where I've had dudes like grizzled 45-year-old hotshots who look like Forrest Gump at the end of his running montage, beard down to here, just like crying in tears, as well as, I've met a few of the widows of some of the folks who died, and had some very moving connections with them, because for them it was very cathartic, because after their husband or fiance had died, the Forest Service just abandoned them. They were on their own. And so one of them in particular has been fighting on Capitol Hill, trying to get their pay increased, trying to get partner benefits and all the things that they should be getting, that normal firefighters get, normal cops would get. And for her, it was a very cathartic experience to watch the film, because it felt like someone finally was telling their story, and no one had done it before. Part of the reason no one had done it before is because these people are so hard to find. Yeah. Their job is so gnarly. They have to go into the deepest, most dangerous places. There were times I had to hike 8 miles just to get to where they were starting to do their work. And then I'm stuck out there for like a week or two. Yeah. It's not feasible for a crew to go and film that. And so that's why this story has been so elusive. Added to that, you get a crew to go and do that. What kind of spin are they going to put on it? And especially if they're only around it for 6 months, or maybe 2 years if they do 2 fire seasons. It took me 6, 7, 8 years to really understand fire, to the point where I can speak fluently about it. And I think that's what's missing from a lot of the other offerings. They rely on cell phone footage because it's so hard to actually be there in the right place at the right time. And then they're also telling a narrative that's sort of inculcated by the mainstream press, which simply does not spend enough time to truly understand it. And, it was, I think everybody's just kind of happy that somebody took the reins from the New York Times and from the LA Times and the Washington Post, and gave some factual stuff in a digestible way that's like, oh, that dude was in our 80-hour training. I can tell because he's saying the kind of stuff that we learned there.
Right, absolutely. I mean, it's another reason Hollywood would never have made this picture, because it was two guys, me and the other guy in the other frame over here. That was it, you know. And then if not with him, he was by himself. And we lugged all the gear in, and we had to carry it on our backs, and that was the only way that we had done it. It's what makes this doc, I think, the definitive wildfire documentary. There isn't one. I mean, I confidently say there's no other picture like this anywhere. You know, and that's a product of going independently, which is why, again, we figured, well, if we started it that way, it seems like we should finish it that way as well. You know, that's why it only made sense to do that. But it's all a credit to Gabe. We talk about being a savvy producer and being patient, and it's another reason why I do this thing. I mean, you're spending 7 years on this. You're like, no, you want this thing out tomorrow. So he really played it the only way you can play it, and that's with patience and some real finesse, you know, and compassion, you know, real honesty, you know. So that's really all him, and then I got to get along for the ride. So.
Just want to again acknowledge just a fan of you two's work with this. Have watched it twice and watched it in sort of different lenses. The first one was because it's like, my God, Phil said I need to watch this, so I'm like, all right, let's kick back and watch it. And then the second time is really just fascinating by the production, the heart that's in it, and then just really trying to digest a lot of the information that's being told, but also having a few laughs into with the narration, which just kept me engaged the entire time. I know films are getting longer, but you know, typically that sweet spot for a documentary is like, yeah. But like for an hour and 40 something minutes, like I did not realize how much time had passed once it was over, and I was still at the point of saying, like, I'm sure they had so much more footage. Now I'm like, and I would take it honestly if I could. So with that being said, I gotta wonder now that you have this one out in the world, what are you two cooking up next? Where do we find this collaboration going forward?
That's good. Gabe and I are always, I think Gabe and I talk at least once a month. I usually call him some kind of crackpot idea. I'm like, all right, here's what we're going to do next. I mean, Gabe and I are always together. I think, we met on High and Outside, baseball movie that I started, and he was the DP. That's where we met. And then we shot a movie in New York that we won't name because I took my name off of it. Or no, I changed my name on it. Gabe literally took his name off of it because we hated it. But we're always working together somehow in some way because we vibe off of each other. We get each other. And Gabe's more than just filmmaker. I consider myself a filmmaker. We just love to tell good stories. So wherever there's a good story, you'll find Gabe and I, getting together telling it. So he just as a shameless plug, he just started a studio in Nashville, which is where he's at right now. Great, beautiful full production studio. So we're going to get into some more non-scripted stuff. For sure. Some narrative stuff as well. And then, of course, now I'm on Chicago Fire. I can't get away from the fire.
I'm stuck.
I have no idea. Just like, okay. It's my life.
When we shot Hotshot, we got 92 terabytes of footage. Yeah. That I underneath my desk, I've got stacks of hard drives. And, we used maybe 2% of that for the film. And so there is a lot on the cutting room floor.
Gabe, we probably should talk about Wilkie Bear.
Oh, yeah.
We did.
Phil, Phil played a version.
This is not in the movie. But we've always thought maybe we put these out as little shorts. Right? Anyway.
Okay.
In the director's cut of the film, we have 5 vignettes. Speaking to that chain dragging behind the vehicle, there is an entire vignette behind that one shot where Phil is Smokey Bear, but he's wearing a wife beater and some overalls, and he's got a big bear head, sort of like Donnie Darko or something. And these vignettes, it was a series of Smokey Bear's life going down the drains and him accidentally starting fires along the way. And so one of them is, he catches his wife stepping out on him, and so he packs up the Airstream and hastily chains the trailer to his truck and bolts. And that's the legacy of that chain shot. And another one where he's using power tools outside and he sparks a fire, and then ultimately culminating in when he firebombs his ex's house, and that's arson. And the whole point was to try to show just how effortlessly and coincidentally fires can start in this Rube Goldberg sort of way, where we're watching this personal drama play out with this bear, and the very last thing that happens is that fire. It's almost like it's just an afterthought, and it was an attempt to try to convey just how easily these things can start, which you touched on earlier. It's like, and again, that speaks to the inevitability of this phenomenon, is that it is impossible to stop these ignitions. And so the best thing you can do is just prepare the fuels and prepare around the things that you don't want to burn, because it's going to happen, whether it's, some personal drama that's happening, or power tools or power lines or arson. That's how it's going to happen. But insofar as what we're doing, look, Phil and I, we like doing narrative stuff primarily. And that's a big part of the reason why the film feels more like a narrative film and less like a documentary. It feels more like Thin Red Line. And actually the working title of the film, until we settled on Hotshot, was Cold Black Line. This cold black line, that is the ultimate goal for Hotshots to have. They want a line, a fuel break that they know it's not hot, it's black, ain't gonna burn again. And so it, to me, was an homage to Terrence Malick. And if that informs what the inspiration behind the visuals and the pacing and some of the themes that come up in the narrative, it is more like a narrative film about a real subject than it is a documentary. And so that is sort of our vibe. That's our style. So even if we do unscripted stuff, we're always looking for a way to make it look pretty and feel more like a movie, so it doesn't get too pedantic. And so moving forward, I know that Phil's got a few scripts that we're shopping around, because we would like to do more narrative stuff. But I would just stay tuned. There's a high probability there's going to be other fire related stuff, because we have about 92 terabytes of stuff that was very hard earned and it's really good. It's not on the cutting room floor because it was bad. It was just, there's only so much you can watch.
Well, that was one of our major issues, was like these cuts were like, talk about, it was like, if Scorsese, Coppola, and Chris Nolan got together and said, let's make a 25-hour filmmaking. That was like our first cut of the movie. And I went into the editing studio, and it's like all the lights are off. There's Starbucks cups and shit. You got like one eye open. He's like, I think, and I'm like, dude, all right, come out. And so taking that cut down to what we have took a long time. And you start to go a little crazy because you're watching the same thing over and over. So to get it down, but we've got so much stuff, and then maybe what we'll do, we'll send you a little of the Smokey Bear. We'll send you one of the vignettes, maybe.
Yeah.
Don't seen it yet, and you could show your audience first look at it. But it was a funny one, because it was like Smokey Bear. He was famous in the 70s and 80s. Got too drunk on his success. And then in the trailer in the desert, and I was like, but it just didn't have a place. It just didn't work. We wanted it so badly to work, and we were like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. We'll shoot you one of them, and it's me under the costume.
Drought, fuels, and ignition. You can't stop every spark. You can't control the weather. The one thing you can control are the fuels.
Amazing. I will take that. Yeah, I'm very I'm all on board to see what happens with the remaining footage, because I was initially going to ask you, with so much footage, do you release it as sort of something purchasable for stock footage for other folks? Because no one's ever going to be able to get this type of footage,
Right.
which only means that the value and the desire of it is at this rate now a golden egg. But if you got other plans with your own stuff, then that's obviously always the way you want to go, you know?
Yeah, and we've had offers on the table over the years multiple times, twice from HBO, once from Nat Geo, once from Universal, and we turned down all of the offers except for one. And we collaborated with HBO for one thing, and that's because Real Sports with Bryant Gumbel was doing a special feature on one of my friends who was an engine captain who also did ultra marathons. So I wanted to support my guy. His name's Jerry Garcia. He's not a fat guitarist. He's a really skinny dude who just runs for 5,000 miles. And so I licensed them all of my footage of him, but I wasn't willing to give them any of my fire footage. And that was the compromise. And ultimately they asked me, like, hey, could we hire you to lead a crew to spend 2 weeks and go get some fire footage? And I gave them a bit of a reality check. I'm like, look, I'm happy to do it, but here's what you got to do. You got to have $60,000 cash on hand to be able to cover my Jeep if it burns up, because I ain't letting my insurance take a hit. You have to have your entire crew on standby 24 hours a day. And be ready to go, because sometimes I would get a tone at 2 a.m. and I'd throw on my boots and I would go. And you got to be ready to drive 9 hours. And all the risk that comes along with that. So you got to be paying people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 2 straight weeks. And then even with that, you may not get a single usable frame, because there might not be any fires, and you can't.
Name of the game, buddy.
That's part of why it took so long to get that stuff, to just be in the right place at the right time.
There were times that I would sleep over at Gabe's house for just days, and we would just wait for calls, and he'd wake me up. It would be like, and if we weren't sleeping, I would be sitting with him, we'd be cutting the picture. I'd be, having some whiskeys and stuff, and it's like, all right, let's go to bed. And he'd wake me up at like 2:45. He'd be like, do you think we need to go to this bar? I'm like, no, we just keep sleeping. Are you sure? Yeah. But then we'd end up hitting the road and going and filming, and that's what it took, And sometimes he'd just call me up. I'd be here, and all right, and I put all my fire stuff on, and pick me up, and we were going to work.
There you have it. Well, gentlemen, I'm sure we can talk about this so much longer, and I feel like I also need to come kick it with you all as well too. I heard you mention the whiskey. You know what time it is, Bill. But once again, much like I had to start this off, I'm super appreciative of our friendship, Phil, and obviously meeting you, Gabe, and the growth of the friendship here. But ultimately, you all, getting out there, risking your lives, emptying out the bank accounts, damaging equipment, and obviously opening up into your personal lives as well too, in order to tell this story that needs so much more awareness, and hopefully that it catches the right eyes of just the ignorance out there who's uninformed about this, but also the people who may be able to make the change out there that is needed. I can't stress enough, no bias. This is truly, and you know, I watch a ton of films. This is truly one of its kind. Never seen footage like this. Never seen a documentary sort of presented in a way like this, with the, as you said, the narration and how it feels more personable and not just something robotic that's just being read off. And that's nothing against any of the celebrities and their fantastic work, because that does is this, and there's a lane for this. But I thought this had to be raw. And I don't mean raw in the sense of like bad production or whatever, or, you know, when some folks say indie, they think like, oh, it's low budget and cheap. No. It's raw because you feel how real it is. There's nothing polished for the masses out there. This is the real deal. And you all did a fantastic job in doing this. And I truly can't wait to see what you all cook up next. So make sure you all keep those mustaches groomed and get back in the lab together.
Next up for us, you're asking creatively, we're going on the road with the Super Mario Brothers. We're going to do a little vaudeville. We're opening for the Three Stooges, clearly, as the Mustachio Brothers.
That's what happens when you get into fire. You end up growing a mustache. It's just unbelievable.
Folks, you could check out Hotshot because there is another film years ago named Hotshot. So you make sure you say Hotshot documentary, Hotshot 2023. You look up Gabriel Mann on Phil Donlon, you'll get to the right one. It's streaming on, it's available on demand and digital right now. Check it out. Get in the comments. Let us know any questions that you may have about it. They'll definitely be monitoring it, or I'll just send a text and say, hey, folks want to know how they can this or that. Just be a part of the conversation, be a part of the change here in terms of watching it. That's what this is all about. So, gentlemen, I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you, man. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Take care. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.